The morning sun revealed what moonlight had hidden. Every single one of my prized heirloom tomato plants had collapsed overnight, their leaves curled and blackened as if scorched by invisible flames. I dropped to my knees in the garden bed, my fingers trembling as they touched the withered stems that yesterday had been vibrant and heavy with ripening fruit. The acrid chemical smell hit my nostrils then, sharp and unmistakable, making my eyes water as I yanked my hand back. Hey there, beautiful souls. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to my story today. I am curious, what part of the world are you tuning in from? Drop your city in the comments below. All right, let us dive into what happened to me. I pushed myself up from the dirt, my knees protesting the sudden movement. My hands were stained dark from the soil, and I wiped them against my jeans as I surveyed the devastation. 3 months of careful cultivation destroyed in a single night. The raised beds I had built myself last spring now looked like a graveyard. The cucumber vines twisted and brown, the pepper plants slumped sideways, even the hardy rosemary bush drooping as if weeping. Movement caught my eye from the neighboring yard. Through the gaps in the fence, I could see Derek Pearson standing on his back deck, coffee mug in hand, staring directly at my ruined garden. Our eyes met for a brief second before he turned away, disappearing into his house with quick, deliberate steps. The screen door slammed behind him. I walked the perimeter of my garden, documenting everything with my phone camera. The destruction followed a pattern, worst near the fence line we shared, gradually less severe toward my house. I crouched low, positioning my lens to capture the spray pattern visible on the fence boards themselves. The wood darker where liquid had soaked in and dried. My pulse hammered in my ears as pieces clicked together like a terrible puzzle. This was the third incident in 6 weeks. First, my mailbox had been knocked over. Then someone had dumped motor oil across my driveway. Now this. I stood and pressed my back against my house, letting the brick warm me despite the rage coiling in my chest. Derek had made his intentions clear since the day I declined his lowball cash offer for my property. He wanted my lot to expand his rental empire, and I had committed the unforgivable sin of saying no. I scrolled through my phone contacts until I found the number I needed. The line rang 4 times before connecting. Property Crimes Division. I need to report vandalism and suspected poisoning of my garden, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. The police officer arrived 90 minutes later, his cruiser rolling to a stop in front of my house. I watched from the porch as he extracted himself from the driver's seat, moving with the unhurried gait of someone who'd seen too many neighbor disputes. His nameplate read J. Morrison in block letters across his chest. He pulled out a notepad before his boots even hit my driveway. I led him around the side of the house, my sandals crunching over the gravel path. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, turning the dead vegetation into a brittle, brown testament to destruction. Officer Morrison crouched at the garden's edge, pulling a pen from his pocket to prod at a withered tomato plant. The stem cracked like old bones under the slight pressure. When did you first notice the damage? This morning, around 6:30. I gestured toward the fence line, my arm sweeping across the devastation. But this isn't the first incident. Morrison straightened, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. He walked the perimeter slowly, his boots leaving impressions in the soft earth between the dead rows. I showed him the photos on my phone, the spray pattern, the concentrated damage near the property line, the oily residue still visible on some leaves. His jaw tightened as he swiped through the images, but his expression remained professionally neutral. You mentioned other incidents? He clicked his pen, poised to write. I detailed the mailbox destruction, the driveway vandalism, the timing that coincided with my rejection of Derek's purchase offer. Morrison scribbled notes but didn't look up, his pen scratching across paper in steady strokes. When I finished, he tucked the notepad into his belt and walked to the fence, pressing his face close to examine the dark stains on the wooden slats. Movement flickered in Derek's kitchen window. I caught the shadow of someone stepping back from the glass, retreating deeper into the house. My fingers curled into fists at my sides, nails digging crescents into my palms. Morrison noticed my gaze and followed it, studying the neighboring property with increased interest. He pulled out his phone and took several photographs of the fence, the garden, and Derek's house. The camera shutter sound clicked rhythmically in the heavy afternoon air. Then he produced a small evidence bag from his pocket and used his pen to scrape sample material from the fence boards into the plastic. The wood yielded dark, crystalline residue that caught the sunlight. "I'll file the report and send these samples to the lab," Morrison said, sealing the bag. "Could take a few weeks for results." My shoulders sagged. Weeks. Meanwhile, Derek could do whatever he wanted, and my garden, 3 years of careful cultivation, was already destroyed. Morrison must have read the frustration in my posture because he paused at the gate, one hand on the latch. "Install cameras, multiple angles, make sure they're visible." He tapped the fence post for emphasis. People behave differently when they know they're being watched. After he left, I stood alone in my dying garden, surrounded by the corpses of plants I'd nurtured from seeds. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the destruction. I pulled out my phone and searched for security camera systems, scrolling through options while my free hand absently touched the brittle leaves, feeling them disintegrate under my fingertips like ash. A door slammed next door. I looked up to see Derek backing his truck out of his driveway, the vehicle's chrome gleaming. He didn't glance my direction, but his hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, his knuckles showed white through the tinted windshield. The truck accelerated down the street with unnecessary force, engine roaring. I ordered 4 cameras with next-day delivery. The cameras arrived in a brown cardboard box that I lugged from my front porch to the backyard, the weight of it solid against my hip. I tore through the packaging with my house key, styrofoam peanuts spilling across the dead grass like artificial snow. 4 black devices emerged, each no bigger than my fist, their lens eyes staring blindly upward. I mounted the first camera on the corner of my roof, the aluminum ladder rattling against the gutter as I climbed. My fingers fumbled with the mounting bracket, sweat trickling down my temple despite the morning coolness. From this height, I could see directly into Derek's backyard. His pristine lawn stretched like green carpet, not a weed in sight. His tool shed positioned exactly 6 feet from the property line. The shed door hung slightly ajar. The second camera went on the fence post facing his driveway. I drove the screws in hard, the drill's whine echoing between our houses. Through Derek's kitchen window, I caught movement, a shadow crossing behind the curtains, then stopping. Someone watching me watch them. I kept drilling, making sure the camera's red recording light blinked steadily, visibly. By noon, all 4 cameras fed live footage to my phone. I sat at my kitchen table, the device propped against my coffee mug, watching 4 different angles of my property on a split screen. The backyard, the side yard, the fence line, the garden beds where everything had died. I swiped between views, learning the rhythm of it, the way tree shadows moved across the ground. How the neighbor's cat on the other side, old Mrs. Patterson's tabby, sometimes cut through my yard. Nothing happened for 3 days. I watched the footage during breakfast, during lunch breaks from my remote work, before bed. My eyes burned from screen time. The garden remained still, brown, lifeless. Derek's truck came and went on its normal schedule. He mowed his lawn on Wednesday, the mower's drone filtering through my windows for exactly 43 minutes. The grass clippings smelled fresh, healthy, mocking the death on my side of the fence. Thursday night, I woke at 2:47 a.m. to my phone buzzing with a motion alert. I grabbed it from my nightstand, nearly knocking over my water glass. The screen showed grainy night vision footage. A figure moving along my fence line, dressed in dark clothes, head covered. My heart hammered against my ribs as I watched the shape crouch near the same section where Morrison had taken samples. I rolled out of bed, pulled on jeans and a sweatshirt, my hands shaking as I fastened the buttons. No time to call police. By the time they arrived, he'd be gone. I grabbed my phone, made sure it was recording, and eased open my back door. The hinges creaked despite my careful movement. The figure straightened, head swiveling toward my house. For 3 seconds, we existed in tableau. Me on my porch, him caught in the act, 20 feet of dead garden between us. Then he bolted, not toward his house, but toward the back of my property, where the fence met a line of overgrown bushes. His footsteps thudded against the hard ground, and I ran after him, my bare feet slapping concrete, then hitting grass. He vaulted the back fence with practiced ease, disappearing into the alley beyond. I reached the fence too late, my lungs burning, and grabbed the top board to pull myself up for a look. My palm landed on something wet, sticky. I jerked back, and even in the darkness, I could see the substance coating my hand. Thick, dark, with a chemical smell that burned my nostrils. I stumbled back to the house, cradling my contaminated hand away from my body. At the kitchen sink, I scrubbed with dish soap, the water running hot, almost scalding. The substance fought the soap, clinging to my skin like oil. It took 3 washes before my palm felt clean, but the chemical smell lingered in my nose, making my eyes water. The phone footage showed everything. I played it back, zooming in frame by frame. The figure's build matched Derek's, same height, same shoulder width, same way of moving with that slight favor to the left leg I'd noticed when he walked. But the video quality wasn't quite clear enough to identify his face under the hood. A good lawyer would tear it apart. I exported the footage to my laptop, backed it up to 3 different cloud services, then emailed it to Officer Morrison with a timestamp. The reply came 40 minutes later. Got it. Come to the station at 9 a.m. to file a formal complaint. Bring all footage. Sleep wouldn't come. I sat at my kitchen table, lights off, watching the live camera feeds on my phone. The backyard remained empty now, but I could see something I'd missed before. On the fence where I'd touched the substance, a dark stain spread across several boards, glistening when my porch light's motion sensor occasionally flickered on. At 6 a.m., Derek's bedroom light clicked on. I watched his house through my kitchen window, coffee mug warming my clean hand. His shadow moved behind curtains, getting dressed, going through morning routines. His front door opened at 6:47, right on schedule. He wore his usual work uniform, khaki pants, button-down shirt, steel-toed boots. He walked to his truck with that same left leg favor, climbed in, started the engine. But instead of backing out, he sat there, engine idling, just sat there behind the wheel, staring straight ahead at his closed garage door. 1 minute passed, then 2. His head turned slowly toward my house, and even across the distance I felt the weight of his gaze. My fingers tightened around the coffee mug until my knuckles ached. I stepped back from the window, pressing myself against the wall beside the refrigerator. My heart hammered against my ribs as I held perfectly still, the ceramic mug still clutched in my hand. The bitter coffee scent mixed with my own nervous sweat. Through the narrow gap between curtain and window frame, I watched Derek's truck finally reverse out of his driveway. He accelerated down the street faster than usual, tires squealing slightly on the asphalt. The clock on my microwave read 7:03. I had 2 hours before my appointment at the station. I dumped the now cold coffee down the sink, watching the dark liquid swirl away, then grabbed my garden gloves, the thick leather ones I used for pruning roses. If I was going to the police with evidence, I needed the actual substance Derek had been using. The morning air bit cold against my face as I stepped into the backyard. Dew covered everything, making the grass slippery under my sneakers. I approached the fence line slowly, examining the ground where Derek had walked. His boot prints were still visible in the soft earth, leading directly to my raised beds. The lettuce I'd planted 2 weeks ago lay completely brown now, wilted into dark mush that smelled like rotten eggs mixed with something chemical and sharp. I knelt beside the nearest planter, my knees soaking through immediately from the wet ground. Using a plastic garden trowel, I scraped at the soil, collecting samples into Ziploc bags I'd brought from the kitchen. The earth felt wrong, too clumpy, too moist, with an oily texture that shouldn't exist in properly composted dirt. 3 bags filled quickly. I sealed each one carefully, writing dates and locations on the labels with a Sharpie that kept slipping in my gloved fingers. The fence boards showed the damage more clearly in daylight. The wood had darkened in streaks, as if something caustic had run down the grain. I pressed one gloved finger against the stain, then brought it close to my face. The smell made my eyes water instantly. Ammonia mixed with something else, something petroleum-based. I scraped residue from the wood into a 4th bag, then stood, my lower back protesting the movement. That's when I noticed my tomato plants along the back property line. Yesterday, they'd been thriving, heavy with green fruit. Now the leaves drooped, edges curling inward, turning that same sickly brown. I rushed over, my shoes squelching in the mud. The base of each plant showed wet marks, as if someone had poured liquid directly onto the roots. Fresh damage. This had happened during the night, after Derek appeared on my camera, after he'd realized he'd been caught. My hands shook as I took photos with my phone, zooming in on the wilted leaves, the discolored soil, the dying stems. He was accelerating his campaign, destroying everything faster now. The realization hit me like a punch to the stomach. He knew I had evidence, so he was going to finish the job before I could stop him. A car door slammed in Derek's driveway. I spun around, nearly dropping my phone. But it wasn't Derek's truck. A silver sedan sat there, and a tall woman with copper-colored hair stepped out, balancing a cardboard box against her hip. She wore business-casual clothes, pressed slacks and a blazer, and moved with purpose toward Derek's front door. She knocked 3 times, sharp and insistent. When no one answered, she set the box down on his porch, pulled out her phone, and made a call. I couldn't hear her words from across the yards, but her body language spoke volumes. She paced back and forth on Derek's porch, one hand gesturing emphatically, her jaw tight with frustration. After 2 minutes, she hung up, grabbed the box, and marched back to her car. She paused before getting in, her gaze sweeping across Derek's property, then landing on me standing there in my backyard with my bags of soil samples. Our eyes met across the distance. She froze, box still in her arms. I raised one hand in an uncertain wave, unsure whether to approach, to ask who she was, to find out what connection she had to Derek. The woman's expression shifted from surprise to something harder. Calculation, maybe, or suspicion. She loaded the box into her trunk, climbed behind the wheel, and backed out quickly without another glance my way. I checked my phone. 7:34. Still time before the police station opened. I gathered my evidence bags, my gloves now stained dark with the contaminated soil, and headed back inside. The samples sat on my kitchen counter in a neat row, damning evidence of deliberate destruction. But as I washed my hands for the third time, scrubbing under my nails with a brush until the skin turned pink, doubt crept in. Would this be enough? Would the police even care about poisoned vegetables? My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Saw you talking to the cops. Mind your own business. The phone trembled in my grip as I read the message again. My thumb hovered over the screen, indecision making my hand shake. I set it down on the counter, stepped back, then picked it up once more. The unknown number stared back at me like an accusation. Through the kitchen window, Derek's house sat quiet, curtains drawn against the morning light. I grabbed my car keys and the evidence bags, my movements jerky with adrenaline. The police station wouldn't open for another 20 minutes, but I couldn't stay in this house, couldn't stand here staring at that threatening text while my poisoned garden wilted outside. My sneakers squeaked against the linoleum as I headed for the garage, then stopped. The threatening message changed things. Someone was watching. Someone knew I'd spoken to officers yesterday about the property dispute. Back in the kitchen, I photographed the text message, then the soil samples, then every angle of my dying garden through the windows. My hands steadied as I worked, the familiar rhythm of documentation calming my racing pulse. I'd spent 30 years as a paralegal before retirement. Evidence collection was muscle memory. I opened my laptop and created a new folder, uploaded the photos, backed them up to the cloud. If someone wanted to intimidate me into silence, they'd underestimated how stubborn a woman gets at 54. The doorbell rang. I froze at the laptop, my fingers still on the keyboard. Through the frosted glass of the front door, a tall silhouette stood waiting. Not Derek's build. This person was lankier, with broad shoulders that suggested someone younger. I closed the laptop and moved through the living room, staying to the side where I could see out without being seen clearly. A woman stood on my porch. Early 30s, athletic build, wearing dark jeans and a leather jacket despite the climbing temperature. Her black hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and she held a manila envelope in one hand. She pressed the doorbell again, then knocked, 3 sharp raps that echoed through my quiet house. I opened the door, but kept the security chain engaged. "Can I help you?" She held up the envelope. "Madison Henry, I need 5 minutes of your time." "Who are you?" "Teresa Vaughn. I'm a private investigator." She pulled out a business card and slid it through the gap in the door. "Your neighbor hired me 3 weeks ago." My stomach dropped. I examined the card, legitimate looking, with an office address downtown. "Derek hired you? To do what? Spy on me?" Teresa shook her head, her expression grim. "Not Derek, the woman who owns the property behind yours, Cynthia Palmer. And I wasn't hired to spy. I was hired to document what's been happening to your garden." The chain rattled as I fumbled with the lock. Teresa stepped inside, and I closed the door behind her, my mind racing through the implications. Cynthia Palmer knew that name. She'd purchased the vacant lot behind my property 2 years ago, the one that bordered both my yard and Derek's. We'd had exactly one conversation, a brief introduction, when she'd posted the initial survey markers. Teresa moved to my kitchen window without being invited, looking out at the devastation. "She suspected Derek of sabotage, hired me to set up cameras aimed at your property line, thinking he was targeting her future build site and yours was collateral damage." "You've been filming my backyard for 3 weeks?" Heat flooded my face. "The property line only. Camera angles were carefully positioned." Teresa opened the envelope and spread a series of photographs across my counter, next to my soil samples. "But we caught more than we expected." The first photo showed Derek in my garden at night, hunched over my tomato plants with a spray bottle. The timestamp read 2:47 a.m., 5 days ago. My breath caught. The second photo showed him pouring something from an unmarked container near my cucumber bed. The third captured his face clearly in the moonlight, his expression cold and focused as he worked methodically along my fence line. But the fourth photograph made my knees weak. It showed Derek and another man, younger, maybe 25, both wearing gloves and mixing chemicals in my neighbor's garage. The garage door was half open, and in the background I could see shelves lined with bottles and containers. "Who's that?" I pointed to the younger man. "Trevor Moss, Derek's nephew. He works at an agricultural supply company." Teresa pulled out another photo. "This is from last night." The image showed Trevor loading boxes into Derek's car, the same car I'd seen parked in his driveway every day. But in this photo, taken with a telephoto lens, the box labels were visible. Concentrated herbicides, soil acidifiers, compounds I'd never heard of, but that sounded industrial strength. My hands clenched into fists on the counter. "Why? Why would he do this?" Teresa gathered the photos back into the envelope. "Cynthia Palmer's planning a 4-story mixed-use development. Derek's been fighting it through every legal channel. Zoning appeals, environmental concerns, neighborhood petitions. He thought if he could prove the soil was already contaminated, toxic, he could block the construction permits." "But that doesn't explain my garden. I'm not building anything." "You're the proof," Teresa said quietly. "If both properties show contamination, it looks like a widespread environmental issue rather than isolated sabotage. Makes his case stronger with the Planning Commission." I leaned against the counter, feeling the solid edge press into my spine. All those months of careful tending, the early mornings watering and weeding, the pride I'd felt watching those first tomatoes ripen, destroyed as props in someone else's property war. The violation felt visceral, like Derek had poisoned something inside me rather than just the soil. Teresa's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then back at me. "Cynthia's on her way here. She wants to coordinate before we take everything to the police." "The police?" I thought of my own evidence bags, my plan to go to the station. "I was already planning. This is bigger now. Chemical trespass, destruction of property, conspiracy. Trevor's involvement makes it worse. He's been stealing compounds from his employer. Cynthia has lawyers ready to file injunctions, restraining orders, whatever it takes to stop this before her development's permanently blocked." Through the window, I watched Derek's house, still quiet, still innocent-looking in the morning light. But now I knew what those closed curtains hid, what happened in that garage after dark. My phone buzzed again, another text from the unknown number. "Last warning." I showed it to Teresa. Her jaw tightened as she photographed the message with her own phone. "That's probably Trevor. He's been watching the surveillance footage, knows we're onto them. He's getting desperate." A black SUV pulled into my driveway. Teresa glanced out and nodded. "That's Cynthia now." The SUV's door swung open, and Cynthia Palmer stepped out, her heels clicking sharp against the concrete. She moved fast, briefcase in one hand, phone pressed to her ear with the other. Through my window, I watched her snap instructions at whoever was on the line, her free hand cutting through the air in precise, angry gestures. Teresa moved to the door before Cynthia could knock. They exchanged words I couldn't hear, both women glancing back toward Derek's house, then at me through the screen. I pushed off from the counter, my legs heavy, every muscle in my body remembering the hours I'd spent yesterday digging up poisoned earth. Cynthia entered like a storm front, energy crackling around her. She set the briefcase on my kitchen table with a decisive thunk and flipped it open. Papers spilled out, legal documents, photographs, what looked like chemical analysis reports with highlighted sections. "We have a problem," she said, pulling out her phone and swiping through images. Trevor Marsh disappeared 4 hours ago. His employer reported him missing after they discovered the theft. Security footage shows him loading boxes into his truck at 3 a.m. My stomach dropped. Teresa leaned over Cynthia's shoulder, studying the phone screen. "How much did he take?" "Enough to contaminate 20 properties." Cynthia's jaw worked, the muscle jumping under her skin. "Maybe more, depending on concentration." I sank into a chair, the wood hard against my spine. My garden wasn't an endpoint. It was a test run. Derek and Trevor had refined their method, learned the dosages, figured out how to destroy vegetation without leaving obvious traces. And now, Trevor was out there somewhere with enough poison to turn the entire neighborhood into a wasteland. "The police?" I asked, my voice coming out rougher than intended. "Already involved. Detectives are at Derek's house now." Cynthia pulled back her curtain of professionalism just enough for me to see the fear underneath. "But they're not moving fast enough. They want to build a case, wait for proper warrants. Meanwhile, Trevor's driving around with industrial toxins." Through the window, I spotted movement at Derek's house. 2 unmarked sedans parked at the curb, men in suits standing on his porch. Derek's front door remained closed, curtains drawn tight. One detective knocked, waited, knocked again. Nothing. Teresa moved to the window, her body tense. "He's not answering." "Because he knows what's coming," Cynthia said. She laid out photographs on my table, printouts from her security cameras, time-stamped and labeled. Derek's truck in my driveway at midnight, Trevor in protective gear, spraying something along my fence line. Both men loading containers into the garage, faces clearly visible under the motion sensor lights. My hands shook as I picked up one photograph. The image showed Derek leaning against my tomato steaks, phone to his ear, smiling. The date stamp read 3 weeks ago, right before the first plants started dying. He'd posed there deliberately, knowing the cameras would catch him, confident enough in his scheme to taunt us. The rage I'd been holding down surged up, hot and consuming. I gripped the photograph so hard the paper crumpled, edges cutting into my palm. 54 years of keeping my composure, of being the reasonable one, the patient one. And for what? So men like Derek could destroy what I'd built and walk away smiling? Cynthia's phone buzzed. She answered, listened, her expression darkening. "Understood. Keep me updated." She ended the call and looked at us both. Trevor's truck was spotted heading toward the commercial district. They think he's targeting the community garden on 5th Street. "That's where—" My throat closed. The community garden fed 3 churches and a food bank. Dozens of families depended on those crops. If Trevor poisoned that soil, the damage would ripple outward, hurting people who'd never heard of Derek Walsh or his property schemes. I stood, my chair scraping loud against the floor. "We need to get there." "The police," Teresa started. "Are 20 minutes behind." I cut in, already moving toward the door. "How long does it take to dump poison on a garden?" Cynthia grabbed her briefcase, nodding sharply. We filed out, Teresa's car keys already in her hand. The morning sun hit my face, too bright, too cheerful for what we were racing toward. I climbed into Teresa's sedan, Cynthia sliding in back, all of us moving with the jerky urgency of people running out of time. Teresa's engine roared to life. She reversed hard, tires squealing, then shot forward. I gripped the door handle as she took the corner fast, the world tilting sideways. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat counting down the seconds until Trevor reached that garden. The streets blurred past. Teresa ran a yellow light, then another, her hands white-knuckled on the wheel. In the back seat, Cynthia was on her phone again, describing Trevor's truck to someone, reading off a license plate number she'd memorized. We turned onto 5th Street. 3 blocks ahead, I spotted it. Trevor's white pickup parked at the garden's entrance, back gate hanging open. A figure in protective coveralls moved between the raised beds, dragging a spray tank behind him, mist already rising from the plants. "There!" I pointed, my voice sharp. Teresa accelerated, the engine's whine climbing higher. Trevor's head snapped up at the sound. Even from a distance, I could see his body language shift, surprise morphing into calculation. He dropped the spray wand and bolted toward his truck. Teresa's sedan jumped the curb, tires thumping over concrete before she slammed the brakes. I was out before we'd fully stopped, my feet hitting pavement at a run. Trevor's hand closed around his truck door handle just as I reached him. I grabbed his wrist, fingers digging into the protective fabric of his coverall. He yanked back hard, his elbow swinging up toward my face. I ducked, felt the air move above my head. My other hand shot out and snatched the keys dangling from his belt loop. The carabiner snapped free. Trevor's eyes widened, rage flooding his features as I stumbled backward, clutching the keys against my chest. "You're done!" I gasped out. He lunged. His shoulder caught my ribs, driving me into the side of his truck. Metal dug into my spine. Pain exploded through my back, white-hot and stealing my breath. The keys tumbled from my hand, clattering onto asphalt. We both dove for them. Teresa got there first. She swept them up with a dancer's grace, then backed away fast, holding them high like a trophy. Trevor roared, an animal sound, raw and desperate. He charged at her instead. Cynthia stepped into his path. She'd pulled something from her briefcase, pepper spray, the small canister held steady at arm's length. Trevor skidded to a halt, his boots scraping pavement, hands raised defensively. Sweat poured down his flushed face, dripping off his jaw. "Don't move." Cynthia's voice was ice. The 3 of us formed a loose triangle around him, cutting off every escape route. My back throbbed where it had connected with the truck. Each breath felt shallow, ribs screaming. I pressed one hand against the pain and forced myself to straighten. Behind Trevor, the community garden sprawled in morning light. The spray tank lay abandoned between rows of tomatoes and peppers. Mist still hung in the air, catching sunlight, turning everything into a poisonous haze. Plants drooped where the chemicals had touched them, leaves curling inward, stems bending. The sharp chemical stench burned my nostrils even from here. A car door slammed, heavy footsteps approached. I glanced sideways and saw a police cruiser parked at the curb, red and blue lights starting their lazy rotation. 2 officers walked toward us, hands resting on their belts, eyes taking in the scene. The spray equipment, Trevor's protective gear, 3 women surrounding him. "Someone called in suspicious activity," the lead officer said, his gaze settling on Trevor. Teresa stepped forward, still holding the keys. "He's been poisoning the garden. We caught him in the act." The officer's partner moved past us, heading toward the spray tank. He crouched beside it, examining the label, his face hardening. He pulled out his radio and spoke into it, words too quiet to hear. The first officer gestured for Trevor to turn around. Trevor's shoulders sagged. All the fight drained out of him at once, leaving him diminished, smaller. He turned slowly, placing his hands behind his back. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed in the morning air. The officer began reciting rites, each word crisp and formal. I watched Trevor's face as reality settled over him. His jaw clenched, muscles jumping beneath skin. His eyes darted toward his truck, then the garden, then finally to the ground. Defeated. The second officer returned from examining the spray tank, shaking his head. Industrial-grade herbicide? Concentrated enough to kill everything here and contaminate the soil for months. My stomach twisted. Months. All those hours of work, the community's effort, the children who'd planted seeds, all of it poisoned beyond quick recovery. I thought of my own garden at home, the beds I'd already torn out, soil that would need replacing. The scope of the damage kept expanding, rippling outward. Teresa touched my arm gently. I looked down and saw I was shaking. My hands trembled, adrenaline finally catching up, flooding my system now that the immediate danger had passed. My back pulsed with each heartbeat, a deep ache that promised spectacular bruising. The officers led Trevor toward their cruiser. He didn't resist, didn't look back. His coverall rustled with each step, that distinctive sound of synthetic fabric. They guided him into the back seat, one hand protecting his head. The door slammed shut with finality. Cynthia lowered her pepper spray, tucking it back into her briefcase with precise movements. Her hands were steady, professional. She turned to me, eyebrows raised in silent question. "I'm okay," I managed, though my voice came out rough. The lead officer approached us, pulling out a notepad. "I'll need statements from all of you." Madison's legs gave out halfway through her statement. She caught herself on the patrol car's hood, palms flat against warm metal, breathing through the sudden weakness. The officer paused, pen hovering over his notepad, concern flickering across his weathered face. "We can finish this at the station," he offered. She shook her head, straightening despite the protest in her lower back. Words came in short bursts. The discovery of the dead plants, the soil tests, the pattern of destruction spreading through her neighborhood. Her voice steadied as she spoke, each detail solidifying the case against Trevor. The officer wrote quickly, filling page after page. Behind her, Teresa gave her own account to the second officer. Cynthia stood nearby, arms crossed, watching everything with that attorney's focus she'd developed over decades of courtroom battles. The evening air had cooled further, carrying the acrid smell of herbicide mixed with crushed vegetation. When the officers finally closed their notebooks, Madison turned toward the community garden. The full scope of devastation was visible now in the fading light. Rows of tomato plants hung limp and blackened. Bean vines withered on their trellises. Even the hardy marigolds, planted specifically to repel pests, had succumbed to the chemical assault. She walked between the beds, cataloging the damage. Her boots crunched on dying grass. 3 months of community labor reduced to toxic waste. The children's section, where bright markers identified each small gardener's plot, looked like a battlefield. Hand-painted stones marked Emma's carrots, and Jose's sunflowers now stood guard over nothing but chemical-scorched earth. Teresa joined her, footsteps careful on the contaminated soil. Neither woman spoke. The silence stretched between them, heavy with shared grief over something irreplaceable now lost. Madison knelt beside what had been a thriving herb garden. Rosemary bushes she'd transplanted from her own yard lay blackened and brittle. She reached toward them, then stopped, remembering the herbicide residue. Her hand hovered in the air for a moment before dropping back to her side. The patrol car's engines rumbled to life. Red and blue lights painted the garden in alternating colors, creating strange shadows that danced across the dying plants. Trevor sat motionless in the back seat, profile visible through the window. He stared straight ahead, face blank, as if none of this touched him. Madison stood, brushing dirt from her knees despite knowing her clothes were likely contaminated anyway. Everything would need washing in hot water, maybe multiple cycles. She'd learned that from the extension office when she'd first suspected poisoning. Herbicides clung to fabric, transferring toxins to skin through repeated contact. The cruisers pulled away, taillights shrinking into the distance. Silence settled over the garden like a shroud. Teresa moved toward the gate, pulling her phone from her pocket to call someone, probably her husband. Cynthia remained, watching Madison with that assessing gaze. "You should go to the hospital," Cynthia said finally. "That fall was serious." Madison touched her lower back gingerly, feeling the swollen heat through her shirt. Bruises were already forming, she could tell from the tender pressure points. But the hospital meant hours of waiting, questions, insurance calls. The thought exhausted her more than the physical pain. "Tomorrow," she promised. "Right now, I need to warn the others." She pulled out her own phone, thumbs moving across the screen. The neighborhood watch group text lit up with urgent messages. Names scrolled past, familiar residents she'd lived beside for years. Mrs. Patterson 3 houses down, the Rodriguez family on the corner, old Mr. Chen with his prized chrysanthemums. Responses flooded in immediately. Questions, outrage, demands for information. Madison typed mechanically, explaining what had happened, warning them to test their soil, offering the extension office contact information she'd memorized weeks ago. Her phone rang. She recognized the number. Sam, her eldest, calling from his apartment across town. She'd texted him earlier about the confrontation. Now his voice crackled through the speaker, tight with concern and barely suppressed anger. "I'm coming over. I'm not home. I'm still at the community garden." Madison walked toward her truck, keys jingling in her pocket. Every step sent fresh aches through her body. "It's over now. Police took him away." The conversation lasted 3 minutes. Sam's protective instincts battling her insistence that she was fine. She won eventually, as she always did, promising to call if anything changed. The lie came easily. She was far from fine, running on fading adrenaline and stubborn determination. Cynthia waited by Madison's truck, briefcase in hand. "I'll start the paperwork tomorrow. Restraining order, civil suit for damages. Criminal charges should stick with what they found in his possession." Madison nodded, unlocking her truck with numb fingers. The dome light revealed her reflection in the rearview mirror. Exhausted eyes, dirt smudged across her cheek, gray hair escaping from its bun in wild strands. She looked like she'd aged 5 years in the past 3 hours. The engine turned over with its familiar rattle. She sat for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, staring through the windshield at the ruined garden. All that work, all that hope, destroyed by one man's hatred and chemical warfare. Madison returned to the community garden 3 weeks later, carrying flat boxes of seedlings in both arms. Her truck bed held more: tomatoes, peppers, squash, herbs purchased from 4 different nurseries across the county. The morning sun cut through the spring air, warming her shoulders as she pushed through the gate with her hip. The plot looked different now. She'd spent the previous weekend hauling away contaminated soil, filling a rented dumpster with wheelbarrow load after wheelbarrow load. Fresh topsoil and compost filled the beds, dark and rich and smelling of possibility. Her muscles still remembered the work, aching pleasantly as she set the boxes down on the path. Other gardeners had helped. She'd arrived one morning to find half the job already done, neighbors working silently with shovels and gloves, their faces set with determination. No one had asked permission. They'd simply shown up. Madison knelt beside the first bed, trowel in hand. The new soil felt different under her fingers, loose, clean, uncontaminated. She dug the first hole, measuring depth with practiced efficiency. The pepper seedling slid from its container, roots spreading as she firmed soil around its base. Then another, and another. Her hands moved in rhythms perfected over decades. Footsteps approached from behind. She recognized the gate without turning. Cynthia, briefcase replaced today with a canvas bag slung over one shoulder. The lawyer settled onto the bench Madison had repaired last week, its slats freshly painted forest green. Settlement came through. His insurance covered everything. Cynthia pulled papers from her bag, setting them on the bench beside her. Medical bills, soil replacement, lost crops, emotional distress. Madison continued planting, not pausing in her work. The check amount didn't matter much. Money couldn't restore what had been stolen, though it helped with practical matters. She'd already decided where most of it would go. The community garden needed new fencing, better security lighting, raised beds for elderly gardeners who couldn't bend as easily anymore. She moved to the tomato seedlings, handling each one with gentle precision. These would grow tall by August, heavy with fruit if she supported them properly. The stakes waited in her truck, along with twine and fertilizer and everything else she'd need for the season ahead. "Restraining orders permanent," Cynthia said, watching Madison work. "And he's looking at 18 months, maybe 2 years. Madison nodded, pressing soil firmly around a tomato plant's base. The legal details felt distant, abstract, courtrooms and sentences existing in some other world. This was real. The dirt under her nails. The seedlings reaching toward sunlight. The simple act of beginning again. She finished the second bed and stood, stretching her back. The garden spread before her, 20 plots in various stages of recovery. Some gardeners had already replanted. Others would start this weekend. Life persisting, as it always did, pushing through concrete and contamination and cruelty to find the light. A car pulled into the lot. Sam emerged carrying boxes of his own, his wife following with their daughter perched on her hip. Madison's granddaughter, barely 2 years old, pointed excitedly at a butterfly dancing between the plots. Sam had taken vacation days to help, showing up every morning this week with coffee and tools and quiet company. They worked together in comfortable silence, 3 generations planting side by side. Sam handled the heavier work, digging holes for the squash mounds. His wife managed the herb garden, setting out basil and cilantro and mint in careful patterns. The toddler sat on a blanket, examining leaves with serious concentration. Madison watched them while her hands continued their work. The garden had always been about more than vegetables. It was about belonging, about claiming space in a world that didn't always welcome her presence, about teaching her children and grandchildren that they deserved to put down roots anywhere they chose. By afternoon, half her plot bloomed with new life. Tender seedlings stood in neat rows, their leaves bright against dark soil. She watered each one carefully, watching moisture sink deep into the ground. The contamination was gone, carried away wheelbarrow by wheelbarrow, replaced with earth that smelled like growth instead of chemicals. Cynthia had left hours ago. Sam and his family departed as the sun dipped lower, promising to return tomorrow. Madison stayed until dusk, finishing the last bed, marking each row with the labeled stakes. When she finally locked the gate behind her, her entire body ached with the good exhaustion of honest labor. Her truck rattled home through familiar streets. The house waited, lights on in windows, looking exactly as it had for 23 years. She parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, staring at her home. No for sale sign marred the lawn. No boxes waited in the garage. She'd claimed this space, held it against pressure and poison and hate, and emerged still standing. Block 1010, 6 months later, Madison's garden exploded with life at the height of summer. Tomato plants hung heavy with fruit, their branches supported by wooden stakes she'd driven deep into unpoisoned soil. Squash vines sprawled across 3 beds, their yellow flowers opening each morning to visiting bees. The corn stood taller than her head, tassels brown and reddy, stalks rustling in the August breeze. She moved between the rows with her harvest basket, selecting ripe vegetables with practiced hands. The sun heated her shoulders through her work shirt. Sweat traced down her spine, but her movements stayed steady, efficient. Each tomato twisted free with a gentle pull. Each pepper came away clean at the stem. The community garden had transformed. Where bare patches once marked abandoned plots, flowers now bloomed in deliberate chaos. A family from Guatemala had claimed the space next to hers, their plants unfamiliar but thriving. Chilies she couldn't name, herbs with leaves like lace. The father nodded to her each morning, their conversations limited but warm. Across the path, 2 college students maintained raised beds of salad greens, harvesting every few days for the farmer's market. The plot that used to belong to old Mr. Chen now supported a therapy group's vegetables, tended by people learning to find peace in growing things. The garden committee had added new rules after her case: soil testing requirements, security cameras, background checks for new members. Madison's basket filled with red and orange and green. She'd already dropped off 2 loads at the food bank this week, boxes of produce for families who needed it. Her own freezer overflowed with blanched vegetables, sealed in bags and labeled with dates. Her pantry shelves lined up with jars of tomato sauce, pickled peppers, herb-infused vinegars. The gate creaked open behind her. She turned to see her grandson carrying his daughter, now walking on unsteady legs. The child squirmed to be put down, and Sam released her carefully. Tiny feet in pink sneakers navigated the mulched path, hands outstretched for balance. She wanted to see her garden, Sam said, watching his daughter toddle toward the herb bed. Madison straightened, one hand pressing against the familiar ache in her lower back. The toddler dropped to her knees beside the basil plants, reaching for leaves with grabbing fingers. Madison moved quickly, redirecting those hands to stroke instead of pull. "Gentle," she murmured, guiding small fingers along a leaf's surface. "Feel how soft?" The child's face showed concentration and wonder. She touched another leaf, then brought her fingers to her nose, sniffing with exaggerated intensity. Her expression wrinkled in confusion at the unfamiliar scent. Sam knelt beside them, his phone emerging to capture the moment. Madison didn't protest. Let him document this. 3 generations in soil that belonged to them, tending plants they'd chosen to grow. Let this be the story that survived. They worked together as afternoon stretched long. Sam dug carrots from the loosened earth while his daughter investigated beetles and examined flower petals. Madison continued harvesting, her basket growing heavier. The garden hummed with life around them. Bees working flowers, birds calling from surrounding trees, the distant sound of other gardeners' conversations. When they finally locked the gate behind them, the truck bed carried enough vegetables to feed a dozen families. Sam secured his daughter in her car seat, while Madison arranged produce boxes so nothing would bruise during the drive. The child's eyes already drooped with exhaustion. Dirt smudged across her cheek like war paint. Madison drove home through streets she knew by heart. The neighborhood had weathered another season. Mrs. Morrison's place remained empty, still on the market after all these months. The for sale sign looked faded now, leaning slightly in the overgrown lawn. Madison didn't feel satisfaction at the sight, just a quiet acknowledgement that some battles ended exactly as they should. Her own house stood solid and welcoming. Fresh paint brightened the trim, work she'd completed in spring, refusing to let anything appear neglected or vulnerable. The lawn stretched green and healthy, maintained with the same attention she gave her garden beds. She unloaded vegetables onto her kitchen counter, sorting them into piles. Tomorrow, she'd deliver shares to neighbors, continue her practice of offering surplus to anyone who'd accept it. The act of giving felt like planting seeds of a different kind, cultivating connections that made a place truly home. As evening settled, Madison stood on her back porch with a glass of iced tea, watching fireflies emerge in the dusk. Her body ached with good tiredness. Dirt remained under her fingernails despite washing. The scent of tomato plants lingered on her skin. She'd defended this ground not just for herself, but for everyone who'd ever been told they didn't belong somewhere. For her children and grandchildren who deserved to inherit more than struggle. For the garden that fed people who needed feeding. The fireflies danced higher, their lights punctuating the darkness. Madison sipped her tea and watched them, feeling the weight of the season's success. Tasting the sweetness of staying when leaving would have been easier. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sam, a photo of his daughter asleep, still clutching a basil leaf in one dirt-stained fist. Madison smiled and saved the image, adding it to all the others that documented their continued presence, their persistent growth, their absolute refusal to be uprooted. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.